Can you see the presentation? Okay. Let me see. Trying to share it. Oh, hold on. Okay. Now, can you see it now?
Yeah, just wait a second because I might have to do the presentation again because we had some trouble with transmitting. You can leave your presentation there if you want to. Ok? Gente,
All
boa
right, so
noite
you
a
can see
todos.
it?
Yeah, so I'm just gonna do a brief introduction now, okay? Because we had a problem and I was doing it the first time, so we're gonna have to do it again. But you can leave your screen there.
Okay. Okay.
Gente, boa noite a todos. Sejam muito bem-vindos a mais uma palestra internacional do SET-IEEE. Eu sou a Camila Cunha e hoje estamos aqui com a Susan Katie Land, que é a presidente eleita do I3E 2020, I3E Fellow e autora ou coautora de vários textos, artigos, webinars, todos apoiando princípios sólidos de engenharia de software e aplicação prática de metodologias de processo de software. Trabalha como gerente de programa de uma agência do governo federal dos Estados Unidos. Se vocês tiverem perguntas durante a apresentação, eu peço que estejam mandando elas no chat, ou em português ou em inglês, do modo que vocês preferirem. E o formulário de presença também já está aberto. Preencham, porque ele vai ser utilizado para o sorteio de um curso de Excel avançado pelo Sigma Treinamentos. Não se esqueçam também da nossa campanha de arrecadação, que é em prol da reforma do Curumim São Pedro, uma instituição que recebe crianças e adolescentes, possibilitando o acesso a experiências e manifestações artísticas, culturais, esportivas e de lazer. As doações podem ser feitas através do QR Code aqui na tela. So, Susan, it's such a pleasure to have you here with us tonight. So you can start your presentation.
All right, thank you. I'm very happy to speak with you today. The mission of IEEE technical activities is to foster the development and facilitate the technical exchange of scientific knowledge that benefits its members, the profession, and humanity. I'm always happy to play a role in IEEE, its mission and vision, and try to support all of our activities. So I hope you enjoy my technical talk today. So today, however, I'm not here to talk to you about IEEE. I'm going to talk to you about cybersecurity considerations for today's industrial control systems. As I move through my agenda, I'm going to take a look back, looking at predictions for 2019 and 2020. And I'm going to talk about the prediction results for the first half of 2020. And I'm going to talk about what happened over the past 2 years, the predictions and the realizations, and were the experts right? This is important. Are we putting the protections in place to protect against the predicted threats? And I'm going to take a look at where we think we really are from a risk posture. And then I'm going to talk about the differences and similarities between traditional IT and industrial control systems. When considering the cyber threat for an industrial control system, are there things that make these systems unique? Next, I'm going to provide you with a series of recommendations for cyber risk prevention and some reference guidance. Lastly, I'll close with some typical mistakes that we see over and over, even with the best cyber prevention frameworks when they're in place. So I'm going to give you just a brief bit of my technical background. For the past 13 years, I've been chief engineer and now program manager for command control, battle management, and communications, or C2BMC product development. People are sometimes confused as the mission of missile defense and its to defend the United States, its deployed forces and allies and friends from missile attacks in all phases of flight. As I described, I'm going to talk about industrial control systems and cybersecurity. I'm not going to talk about the U.S. missile defense systems, but I leverage my experience with these mission and safety critical systems. There are many analogies that can be drawn between these systems that I work on and other safety or operationally critical industrial control systems, particularly in the way the legacy and proprietary infrastructure is fielded and integrated, and the way critical cybersecurity patching is deployed and how vulnerabilities are targeted. Industrial control systems manage industrial processes. An industrial control system is a general term that encompasses several types of control systems used in industrial production. These include food manufacturing, utilities generation, transmission, oil and gas production, and distribution. Our lives are incredibly affected by this type of engineering. To think of the impact that cybercrime could have in this area should give us all pause. Thankfully, these systems have been relatively immune to attacks because every ICS environment is unique, meaning that attackers bent on crashing a local power grid or some other environment would need time, money, patience, and access to determine how to disrupt it. The U.S. giant Jack Daniels has become the latest big name to suffer a serious ransomware-related data breach. REvil is claiming to have over 1 terabyte of data and often targets vulnerabilities in remote access infrastructure, such as pulse security VPNs, to compromise its corporate victims. An additional target, August 15th of this year, has been the world's largest cruise operator, Carnival, which was hit by a huge ransomware attack. The company welcomes around 13 million guests each year. From my research, it seems we're poised for growth. From all the threats that have been tracked, most of the activity started in 2016 and 2017. And as you will see, the data points to ever-increasing growth in this space, which is really concerning. So the headlines are tantalizing, but I wanted to look at what the cyber labs and their researchers were predicting and to see how we're really doing currently. Are we really better off or not? Were their predictions correct? Are we protecting our systems from the right threats? So I turned to the reporting agencies, the predictions from Sophos, Symantec, and Kaspersky Labs. I wanted to look at several predictive reports. All of these companies are known for the development of antivirus software and for their extensive research in the areas of cyber threat prevention. Simply put, their businesses are dependent upon getting their predictions in this area right. So it's important to listen to what they have to say. Although there are a number of key predictions in these reports, I'm going to focus on 5 of the predictions, which I feel are consistent and present serious infrastructure threats. The first is more router and modem attacks. I have highlighted some of the most common router attacks on the slide, and these include denial of service, packet mistreating, routing table poisoning, hit and run, and persistent attacks. So your router is a translator, and it's the perfect host for man-in-the-middle attacks. Compromised routers are the worst thing that can happen for computer users. So I read an article in Computer World and found this great analogy regarding hacked routers. So consider you're trying to talk to someone who does not speak your language, like Portuguese. I don't speak Portuguese. And you're at the mercy of the translator. If the translator is malicious, you can imagine how disastrous the conversation might be. Likewise, your router is in the middle of every communication you have on the internet. Next, I'm going to talk about the predictions associated with more high-end mobile malware. Mobile devices can generally be broken down into 2 broad categories, personal and corporate. And I'm going to talk about this prediction because of the corporate category. Mobile devices contain applications, documents, stored credentials, and often sensitive business information. When hacked by malware, these can provide a toehold into the corporate or associated ICS network. One of the concerns for 2020 is the expanded attack. One of the concerns is the expanded attack surface area with the number of 5G network infrastructure deployments that kicked off in 2019. More 5G IoT devices will connect directly to the 5G network rather than via the Wi-Fi router. This trend will make those devices more vulnerable to direct attack. I'll talk about the prediction infrastructure as a service, or IaaS, breaches. Infrastructure as a service is a form of cloud computing that provides virtualized computing resources over the internet. A third-party provider hosts hardware, servers, storage, and other infrastructure components on behalf of its users. What we're talking about here is basically outsourcing the management of your cybersecurity to a third party. Not the responsibility, but the management. Next, I'll talk about supply chain attacks. Attacks that exploit the supply chain will grow in frequency and impact. Attackers are replacing legitimate software updates with malicious code. Attackers have been targeting software and hardware, but the predictions are that there will be significant expansion of attempts to infect hardware supply chains, seeing companies compromises in chips and components prior to shipping. So one famous example of this was discovered late in 2018 during an Amazon acquisition of a company called Elemental Technologies, and through routine evaluation of their security and systems, it was discovered that there was a problem with the servers that were assembled by a company known as Supermicro, in particular their motherboards. This was concerning because Supermicro systems were deployed throughout the Department of Defense in the United States. These motherboards contained a tiny microchip, not much bigger than a grain of rice. That was not part of the board's original design. It was determined that this chip would allow attackers to create a stealth doorway into any network that included the altered machines. The chips had been inserted during the manufacturing process by operatives from a unit of the People's Liberation Army. So to quote Bloomberg's Businessweek and Supermicro, China's spies appeared to have found a perfect conduit for what U.S. officials now describe as the most significant supply chain attack known to have been carried out against American companies. According to a 2016 Accenture survey, more than 60% of cyber attacks originate from supply chain or external parties through this type of attack. This type of attack can be as simple as corrupting a vendor's patch or infiltrating the code base or the production environment. So you can see from this slide that the number of attacks from 2017 on have dramatically increased. So this might have seemed to be a relatively obvious prediction to make. I'm not going to talk about all of these attacks, but want to mention a few. The NotPaya gained administrator access on a machine and then leveraged that power to commandeer other computers on the network, taking advantage of the fact that far too many organizations employ flat networks in which an administrator on one endpoint controls other machines. The FlockZip hack infected 2.2 million worldwide with a backdoor. Attackers specifically targeted 18 companies, gaining access to names like Samsung, Sony, Intel, Shenhua, and Fujitsu. In the attack on South Korea, hackers compromised a commercial antivirus package to provide a path to breach and steal South Korean classified military data, including wartime contingency plans jointly developed by South Korea and the United States. From May to September in 2018, there was an average of 7 cyber attacks per month. One of the most prominent was the Costco shipping outage on July 24th, 2018. After initially manifesting at the Port of Long Beach, the attack against the shipping firm spread across 9 countries on 2 continents. Moreover, the threat actor named LeafMiner has targeted business verticals in finance, energy, telecommunications, construction, and more. The final prediction I'll discuss today is how, although leveraging the Internet of Things allows us to carry out activities far easier and faster than ever before, the downside of all this convenience is that it offers up potential backdoor into operational systems. Predictions also warn that although we will continue to see massive distributed denial of service attacks, that we will see attacks against IoT devices that bridge digital and physical worlds. The expectations are that the numbers of attacks against IoT devices that control critical infrastructure, such as power distribution and communications networks, will become more prevalent. When thinking of IoT, many do not think of industrial control systems, but the use of smart IoT in industrial production are already deployed and their use is growing. So this threat is something of concern. By 2020, it is estimated that 35% of manufacturers already use smart sensors. In oil and gas production, 5.4 million IoT devices will be used in oil extraction sites. To meet the demand for energy, these companies will be installing nearly 1 billion smart meters this year. Additionally, municipalities worldwide are increasing their IoT investments to 133 billion they increased it to 133 billion in 2019. So let's look and talk about were the predictions right. So let's see. So I heard about the most widely publicized modem hack in 2018 when the US issued a warning, and the warning included home office routers. And I could not remember my home office router password. It had been so long since I changed it. A rare joint US-UK alert noted that Russian hackers were targeting infrastructure developers, ISP providers, and that even small home office customers should all take protective action as routers, switches, firewall, and network intrusion detection systems were key vulnerabilities. Additionally, a relatively recent pretty basic vulnerability was discovered with 4G EE mini modems. The system allows the replacement of the service manager.exe, opening up targeted computers to exploitation. So I would say the predictions were right again, and we did see an increase in router and modem hacks. Another prediction from the 2018 reports was the use of more high-end mobile malware, and I was curious. I wanted to see the data trends, what they were for this area. You can see that from the recent 2019 data that these attacks have actually been going down year over year. And this was one early prediction that appeared to be on the decline. Where these types of attacks are concerning for ICS are the interface touch points. Access points offer up system cyber vulnerabilities. Environmental awareness is key. What is surprising is that over the last year, the Mac operating system malware has increased by 165%. This is very surprising. So what about the prediction that data breaches associated with the usage of infrastructure as a service would increase in 2018? We saw that US retail data breaches more than doubled during the first half of 2018, rising to 50% from 19%. Between January and September, over 7.9 billion data records were exposed, which was a 33% increase. And then in the first quarter of 2020, we saw an increase of 273% over the previous year. So the predictions were right. And this was an increase, this was over a 2-year period. So let me go back. So in January of that year, Landry's suffered a malware attack, their second since 2015. And and they were their customer credit card data was targeted. In February, the dark web posted information associated with 142 million records for hotel guests at MGM resorts. In March, T-Mobile suffered a malicious attack of a third-party email vendor exposing personal information of customers, including names, addresses, social security numbers, financial account information, etc. Again, in March, an unprotected database containing over 5 billion individual records was discovered. It was a database of data breaches. So it contained records belonging to Adobe, Twitter, Tumblr, and LinkedIn, and had user account information. And in April, over 500,000 Zoom user credentials were found for sale on the dark web. So also Facebook saw another leak, and this time credentials and personal information for sale on the dark web. More than 267 million accounts were leaked. So I want to talk for a minute about Facebook and their history of data breaches. This is grouped with the infrastructure as a service because Facebook's computing infrastructure is based on cloud computing concept that basically provides its infrastructure as a service internally. I put together this slide that shows the number in millions of users of data records exposed on the left and the date of exposure and type of vulnerability for exposure on the chart. And I'm highlighting this not to pick on Facebook, but to point out that when you sign those user agreements on any social network, it's important to pay attention to the terms and conditions as they are heavily in favor of the provider and don't protect you in the case of a data breach. So in a 2018 CrowdStrike survey, in which 1,300 senior IT decision makers and IT security professionals were interviewed, 2/3 experienced a software supply chain attack. In the same survey, almost 2/3 admit that they are not prepared for a supply chain attack, and they are vulnerable, and only about a third place prevention of supply chain attacks is one of their top 3 areas of security IT prevention. In 2019, 300 cybersecurity incidents impacting supply chain entities last year, with the most common attack coming in the form of company crippling ransomware. So let's talk about, let me see, page 1, okay. So let's talk about the increases in vulnerabilities associated with the Internet of Things. This June, the cybersecurity firm JSOF disclosed a set of zero-day vulnerabilities, collectively known as Ripple 20. These vulnerabilities are present within the TREC TCP/IP stack. These 19 vulnerabilities affected hundreds of millions of devices or more and include multiple remote code execution vulnerabilities. The risks inherent in this situation are high, and so here are a few examples. Data could be stolen off a printer, an infusion pump behavior could be changed, or industrial control devices could be made to malfunction. An attacker could hide malicious code within embedded devices for years. One of the vulnerabilities can enable entry from outside into a network within a network boundaries, and this is only a small taste of the potential risks. According to the report from Clarity, affected vendors range from one-person boutique shops to Fortune 500 multinational corporations, including HP, Schneider Electric, Intel, Rockwell Automation, Caterpillar, Baxter, as well as many other major international vendors suspected of being vulnerable in medical, transportation, industrial control, enterprise, energy, telecom, retail and commerce, and other industries. Published in June this year, the U.S. National Security Agency and Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency issued a joint alert stating that all U.S. critical infrastructure facilities should take immediate action, stating that internet accessible assets, particularly those with legacy operational technology assets, are not designed to defend against anticipated cyber threats. The immediate and most concerning threats identified in the report were spear phishing to obtain IT network access to pivot to the operational network, possibly then deploying ransomware, as we saw earlier with the Jack Daniels incident. Very concerning are the increasing number of internet-connected programmable logic controllers requiring no authentication. And I'll talk about the protection of your application layer port traffic and the risks associated with malicious vendor payloads later in this briefing. So I'd like to take a moment to talk about the differences and similarities between industrial control systems and traditional information processing systems. And I'd like to state up front, there are similarities, but the world of the ICS cybersecurity engineer is very different. Although some characteristics are similar, ICS also has characteristics that differ from traditional information processing systems. Many of these differences stem from the fact that logic executing in ICS has a direct effect on the physical world. So I've listed the two types of systems on this slide and offer a comparison. Some of these ICS characteristics include significant risk to the health and safety of human lives and serious damage to the environment, as well as serious financial issues such as production losses, negative impact to a nation's economy, and compromise of proprietary information. So the critical thing to remember is that the implementation of cybersecurity protocols in a traditional IT environment is challenging, but implementing these controls in an ICS environment can often block or delay the flow of information through these networks, resulting in unintended changes to instructions, commands, or alarm thresholds, or sending inaccurate information to operators, which could have other negative effects. So I've spoken about the cyber risk and the nature of the operating environment. So I'm now going to talk about what might be done to prepare or to fight a cyber threat. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the phrase defense in depth. The idea behind defense in depth is to manage your cyber risk with a layered and diverse defensive strategy. So that means that if you have one layer of defense and it turns out to be inadequate, that you have multiple layers of protection and more layers of detection, right? So however, from an implementation standpoint, defense in depth simply means you need to look at your cybersecurity strategy holistically. So looking at the rings represented here, you cannot simply only focus on 2 or 3 of the rings, excluding the others, to have successful cybersecurity. You must consider everything. I'll only be touching on a few of the key items here. I won't be discussing physical security or development of specific policies and procedures. I just tried to focus on a few of the things that relate to the highest risk items that are related to the prediction reports, as well as items I know from my own experience that are of vital importance. So if you're developing software or receiving software that is developed specifically for your systems, you need to pay special attention to their associated cyber vulnerabilities as well. These are things that may be shipping with your delivered code. So the first couple of things are the random number generator and the password hash that are shipped standard with your programming languages. So these are generally not what you want to depend on if you're trying to develop code to support secure computer systems. When software generates predictable values in a context requiring unpredictability, it may be possible for an attacker to guess the next value that will be generated and use this guess to impersonate another user or access your sensitive information. So the bottom line is don't use those items that come with the shipped development code. So if you're sitting there wondering who would use these defaults, well, there was a MyFitnessPal account hack where 150 million accounts were hacked. Some proportion of the exposed passwords were only hashed using that SHA-1 that's listed on the screen. So check all available vulnerability databases for the languages you're using. So I did a quick lookup preparing this briefing for the new C, which is a language used on many Linux systems. And there's a pretty serious issue that was identified that can be triggered when the get address info library function is used. An incorrectly formatted reply to this function will cause an overflow. And there are multiple ways that the target system can receive a malicious reply. So simply put, an attacker can use a DNS reply to run code on a targeted Linux system. And that's pretty egregious. Lastly, change the default and admin passwords for your firewalls, routers, and databases. So just to revisit the basics, it's important to utilize authentication, authorization, and encryption. In authentication, the user or computer has to prove its identity to the server or client. And if you're only employing single-factor authentication, your systems are vulnerable. Multi-factor authentication is a proven way to lessen the likelihood of a data breach via compromised password, and can be something you know as a PIN, something you have like a token, or something you are as in a new facial recognition app to unlock your phone. In authorization, the server determines if the client has permission to access a file or use a resource and limits access or operations performed. With encryption, the data is transformed so it's unreadable until it's decrypted. Although encryption is good, authenticated encryption is recommended for today's environments as it provides both data privacy and integrity. So I've listed some recommended references for the employment of authenticated encryption on the slide. Those are great references. NIST is a good source, and the IEEE standards I have there are really great sources. All right, so if you're responsible for complex systems of systems, having properly documented network diagrams is critical. If you've ever had a failure and tried to diagnose the root cause without current diagrams, you'll know how wildly frustrating it can be. So diagrams are critical when you can't afford system red time and need to diagnose critical system infrastructure failures. So regardless of the size or complexity of your network, it's always a good idea to have a current logical design of your network documented. And this should include all information such as IP addressing, servers, like all your devices. So think about this and ask yourself an honest question. If your network is down and your usual go-to network guru or administrator is not available and you have to call in a replacement, someone who has no knowledge of your network, given the diagrams you currently have on hand, how long would it take to restore your network? If the answer is painful, then you need to update your diagrams. So most people have an understanding of how firewalls are used to protect private networks from public networks. These are software or hardware that protect a network from external threats. So you can think of an intrusion detection system, or IDS, as that next barrier of protection. It's passive. It detects an intrusion and sets off an alarm, like a home alarm detecting an intruder and notifying the police. Additionally, an IDS system can also detect system misuse or attacks that originate internally from within your organization. So I've listed the two types of IDS systems, network and host-based, and their advantages and disadvantages. And to briefly summarize these, the network-based IDS are easier to deploy and detect network-based attacks. Host-based IDS generate fewer false positives and detect attacks that are host-based. So the specific requirements would drive the type of system or combinations of systems that would need to be deployed. So I just described a reactive type of secondary defensive network protection system. This next type, an intrusion prevention system, or IPS system, is a much more proactive type of system that can be employed to preemptively block application attacks, while an intrusion detection system detects and alarms. An intrusion prevention system monitors network traffic in the same manner, again detecting malicious inputs, but then stops detected incidents. There are unique challenges when employing intrusion detection and prevention systems with industry control systems. See, many of these systems have been built up over years and include legacy and custom code that often lead to the incorrect flagging and blocking of valid information. Many organizations are slow to adopt these second-tier protective mechanisms and rely on air gap separations for protection. More than one business has learned the hard lesson that air gaps do not protect against cybercrime. So if your organization, or if you think you're going to depend on an air gap and you don't have your private cyber infrastructure connected to anything externally, you must still protect yourself with firewalls, and more preferably second-tier protections like IDS or IPS. Too many times with air gaps, well-intentioned person or employee comes in with a USB or temporary cable and your air gap is gone. So I've included this diagram then this is a pretty simple network. This tells you why you need a diagram for illustrative purposes, just to provide an example of a network with an intrusion detection system employed. The deployment of an IPS or IDS is not a simple fix, but a pervasive deployment, and each network is unique. If poorly architected, an implemented IDS or IPS product could significantly affect network traffic. So you have to look for the ability to use clustering or share processing connections, and thus enhance and reduce downtime. An intrusion prevention system should capture traffic just to separate the analysis component onto a dedicated server. For high security industrial control systems that are required to network with lower security systems, cross-domain solutions are employed. These security devices ensure that data flows are permitted and protected from higher security systems to a lower security environment. So this is a simple graphic of a CDS showing two domains and how the data diode is employed for content inspection within a transfer CDS. So as I touched on, industrial control systems may contain proprietary software and network interfaces. And today, these systems are increasingly merging with corporate systems and their use of non-proprietary systems, like Windows operating systems. These integration challenges are complex, particularly when you factor in associated cybersecurity risk. And it's scary to think that when surveyed, only about half of the ICS security practitioners regularly applied vendor patches to their systems. This is something that's easy to understand if you have ever worked on a legacy system. The application of a vendor patch can simply render your system unusable. Additionally, in an ICS environment, typical enterprise IT does not work. Small maintenance windows are part of the problem as well. When things must run around the clock, sometimes there's just once a year where there's enough time to do a security upgrade. The development of a gap assessment or documentation of the detailed knowledge of your cyber vulnerabilities for legacy systems is key, along with how you're managing this risk. It's one way to cope with this upgrade and integration challenge. So I begin with this slide with the current failure rates for the larger drives. We're storing larger and larger amounts of data, and we're becoming complacent. I can remember when disk failures were a regular occurrence and our failure and recovery plans were a priority and were practiced. Failover and failure were both a fact of life, and now even with hardware costs continuing to fall, I have to champion to ensure that failover and contingency plans remain above the cut line in my IT budgets. So now I've had just enough time to touch on some of the current cybersecurity risks that are out there, to talk about some prevention techniques that are available and a few of the challenges. But where can you go for help? So here I've presented an overview of industrial control systems security lifecycle and some of the standards that are available for use. The risk management framework is what is being used by the U.S. Department of Defense. The framework consists of a set of 826 controls, enhancement controls, and incorporates security categorizations, information system descriptions, system boundaries, monitoring strategies, and patch management strategies. So I'm not going to go into the RMF detail here today, but in the backup portion of this briefing, I've included additional detail associated with the framework for those of you that might be interested. These details include additional information associated with documentation referenced, as well as details associated with the RMF controls, the enhancements, and evaluation methods. So I can't leave here today without mentioning some things I've seen in software development, both as a development program and a program manager for many years on a variety of systems. I see the same cyber issues, the same mistakes, and I feel compelled to highlight them in closing. Any systems administrator or any individual responsible for cybersecurity will tell you that the number one cyber risk is the end user. It's just a fact of life. And we need to ensure that our users are following secure access procedures. Many times, an attack or exposure is simply the result of a password left written in the wrong place, or a logon being left unattended, or data being left exposed. And phishing is a huge risk. Clicking on that email or link that has been sent to us. In 2018, the Department of Justice indicted 9 Iranian hackers who attacked more than 300 universities in the United States and abroad, infiltrating 144 U.S. universities, 176 universities in 21 other countries, 47 private companies, and other targets like the United Nations, the U.S. Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, stealing 31 terabytes of data, estimated to be worth $3 billion in intellectual property. And it started with phishing emails. So remember that massive botnet that took over the internet? I think it was a couple years ago. It worked by hacking millions of insecure Internet of Things devices and then combining their power, kind of like a zombie horde, to become an internet destabilizing super botnet. And it was only able to do that because so many IoT devices had bad default passwords. So passwords are often an overlooked last line of defense. And incidentally, California passed a law banning default passwords like admin or 123456 or the old classic password in all new consumer electronics starting in this January in 2020. This applies to every new gadget built in the state, from routers to smart home tech, that has to come, everything has to come out of the box with a reasonable password. So now I'm going to highlight what I consider the top 5 common network security vulnerabilities. And the first is missing patches. Many incidents occur because hackers exploit unpatched systems. It's important to follow network security best practices. Keep your systems as up to date as possible. Previously mentioned, this is often a challenge in legacy systems. But if systems are not up to date, you must understand your risk posture. The second is weak or default passwords. Change all default passwords and test for weak passwords. Use a password management tool as support for enforcement. The third is misconfigured firewall rule bases. Do not assume your firewall is working. Analyze the rule bases. You might be surprised to find some serious configuration weaknesses that allow for unauthorized access. The fourth on the list is mobile devices, phones and laptops and other mobile devices. So you have to think of the VPN connections and cached passwords and all the web browsers and the use of unsecured web browsers. You have to make mandatory data encryption part of a security policy. And the last, USB flash drives and security to support other external storage devices. You have to ensure that there are security policies for all personal storage devices and restrict computers that can read USB flash drives. So that picture I have on the screen is supposed to be a fax machine. Why a fax machine? And who still uses fax machines? Well, believe it or not, a vulnerability identified in August exists for 45 million fax machines in use globally with network connectivity. Hackers can easily find the company fax number and are sending files that are exploiting buffer overflow vulnerabilities for a number of popular all-in-one fax printers. The malicious payload is loaded, sent to the fax, decoded, uploaded into the fax printer's memory, and then spread throughout the network. So while a patch is available for this exploit, this is an example of why it's so important to stay current with every device supported on a network. So I'm going to close with a quote I think sums up how I think our approach to cybersecurity should be. It should be a process, not a product. As you've heard, the threats are ever present and are always changing, and you have to adapt. I'd like to thank you for your time and attention. My name is Kathy Land, and you can reach me at the address that's listed on the slide. I'm also on Instagram. It's Susan Kathy Land. It's pretty easy to remember. So if you ever have any questions, there are multiple ways to reach out and contact me. I'll stop sharing. Let's see. And I will turn back on my camera. So if there are any questions.
Sure. Thank you so much, Susan. I'm gonna move now for the first question. Renata is asking you, Susan, with the amount of data that large companies have from users like Facebook, Instagram, what is the most attacked medium today? Business, government, or residential?
So Facebook and Instagram, that's really kind of first, they don't make money on your data, right? They have data and they have data breaches, right? So there are people that take the data the data breaches and sell that data that from those attacks and those breaches on the dark web, right? So that's one thing. But I want to clarify that Facebook and Instagram, the way they make money is they sell influence. So that's a whole nother webinar. So, but so tell me what the question was again. Say the second part of the question.
So she asked,
Ask me the question again. I got
yes, like, what is the most affected medium today? If it's business, government, or residential?
oh. Um, it's businesses. So if you go and you do a query on cyber attacks, like there, I have to update this brief every month or so. You saw the Jack Daniels attack. You saw the Carnival Cruise Line. It's businesses, but what I look for when I'm updating this is businesses that are, I throw those in the brief because they are glamorous type attacks, but I'm really looking for attacks on power companies. Jack Daniels is a production company, right? They are supplying, it's alcohol, but it's a production company. Think of food manufacturing, those types of companies, critical infrastructure services. That's a real critical type of, we can't afford for those to have cybersecurity breaches. And those are the types of things I look for. And it's just it's not part of my job. It's just a interesting side thing that I look for. But the major breaches, the ones that are happening all the time, are the Facebooks, are the Instagrams, are the retailers get attacked all the time. So don't ever give your data out if you can help it. When you're shopping and they ask for your email, don't give it out. I can't imagine why you would give your email information out when you're asked for that at a retailer, because you can just count on that is going to get stolen. That information is going to get stolen. It's not secure.
I'm scared now because I always do that.
You should be. You should be. I'm
Yeah,
scared.
like
Every
put
time
your
I look at the
email
data,
and get
I
the
put that
password.
slide together and it was scary. Yeah, that slide on Facebook had nothing to do with the briefing, but I got that data, and nobody has a slide like that. And I found that data and I built that slide, and I'm like, who would be on Facebook after seeing that? I'm not on Facebook. I'm on Instagram and I'm on Twitter. But I can't imagine anybody staying on Facebook after that.
Wow. Okay, so we have another one. Mateus is asking you, do you
Okay.
believe that internet user security behavior can positively impact the statistics? Or do you believe the key for cybersecurity lies on actions taken by companies that use data on internet?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question, but you can influence your own if you make sure that when you're on the internet and your computer is secure and you have all the virus software and you have everything encrypted, like when you encrypt your email and you sign your emails, and you're making sure that, when you're using any piece of equipment, that it's secure and you don't put a USB in your computer, all of those things that you're practicing good cybersecurity behavior, you can influence the statistics. I hope that was how I could answer the question. Companies have to make sure that they are employing rigorous cybersecurity controls and also that they understand their risk posture, because things are always changing. The fax machine example at the end of the brief is a classic example of how you can have like the most rigorous, cybersecurity person in your company and then have this legacy piece of equipment hooked up and they're just not monitoring it. Right? So it's kind of scary. They're very, 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 the criminals will find a hole in your system. You just have to be very aware of everything. With Internet of Things, you have to be very aware of everything that's hooked up to your network, if it's network enabled.
Yeah, I think you're gonna make me change all my passwords right now.
You should, and they should not be the same. Everybody uses, if you have one password for everything, you're crazy.
I do.
And because that's a recent hack. They'll find your password and they start breaking into all your other accounts. The other thing is, cybersecurity is a great field right now for computer professionals. So if you're in computer science or if you're in electrical engineering or any kind of technical field and you are interested in this crazy world, cyber world, it's a great paying field. It's a field that's always changing. So it's a good career path to go down right now.
Nice.
High demand.
Great to know.
Mm-hmm.
So now what we're gonna do, we're gonna draw 4 people out of the attendance list because we have some prizes for them. So we have from 1 to 55, and I ask you to choose 4 numbers, 4 random ones, so we can sort
Okay.
those people.
Okay. It's going to write them down. Okay, I have a pen. So they won't think I'm cheating. I'll write them down.
You can just say them out loud.
I know. Oh, okay.
Yeah, because
Okay.
we're gonna.
I got them. All right. You want me to- Okay. Here they are. Can you see? 2,
Not
8.
really. Okay.
2,
2, 8.
2. Okay. 2, 15, and 54.
15 and 54.
15.
Okay. Okay,
Yep.
I got them all. Thank you very much. So let's just wait a second while our team check for the winners. Number 2, Eric is Mauricio Barbosa. Congratulations. Number 8,
Yay.
Mayara Carelli de Paula Costa. Next, Heitor Augustus Xavier Costa. Last but not least, Nata Carvalho. So I ask that you all just contact our student branch so you can receive your prize. And thank you very much. So Susan, I thank you so much for being here today. It's such an honor for our branch to have you participating on our event. And yeah, we're really glad that you're here. So thank you. It was awesome. All the tips you gave us, I'm going to be using that. So thank you. And I would also like to thank our partners, the student branches from PUC Poços and UF, and the section Minas Gerais, and the ONG Engenheiros Sem Fronteiras for supporting our event. Obrigada a todos por terem participado. Uma boa noite e espero vocês às 8h30. Daqui a 30 minutos, que a gente tem outra palestra da Marina Chiavata sobre hacker humano. Um forte abraço. Susan, could you please give us a strong hug? It's a phrase we have here that is really common on our branch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah?
So yeah, just say a strong hug.
Do you want a hug?
Yes, but I can't. We're in a pandemic. Yeah, the literal translation that we say, I would say strong hug. We just wish you a strong hug.
Okay, wish you a strong hug as well.
Yay, thank you. Thank you. Bye.
All right.